and welcome to this meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on a Comprehensive Job Creation Plan. I'm Paul Krikorian, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Blumenfield and Price, and we're ready to begin. Today we're going to be hearing further reports from our General Manager of Economic and Workforce Development Department on Section 108 loans. And before we do that, are there any general public comment cards? Seeing none, general public comment is closed. I'd like to invite up Wayne Spindler to speak on item number 1. And Mr. Spindler, you'll have, actually let's go ahead and have you testify on both 1 and 2. You have 2 minutes on those 2 items, please.
Yes, we're downstairs in the Plum Committee. Your little thing in CD3 is going very well. They're going to over-densify. But these reports are meaningless. How can you create jobs when you have a $15 an hour minimum wage on its way? How can you create jobs when you're wanting to raise the sales tax half a cent? And I was at the Council on Governments in the San Fernando Valley on Thursday. Somebody was here. He was here. And how can you streamline something when there's no job creation positively in this city in almost 20 years? We have not had private sector growth. You have to create an environment so that jobs come, and they will come. You build a good city like Glendale, Pasadena, Burbank, they will come. They will open up. Las Vegas, Nevada, they will open up. But you have to have low taxes, you have to have minimal regulation, and you have to have transparent government. How can you have transparent government when there's a federal grand jury across the street right now dealing with the city structure?
It has nothing to do with the topic.
But it does, because it's reputation. A city goes based on things such as reputation and perception of reputation. And this city has a very bad perception of reputation right now. We have the Porter Ranch situation. Thousands of houses could be destroyed. This is negative economic impact on the private scale.
Section 108 loans and procurement, sir,
yeah, but
has nothing to do with the
you can have
the city.
Loans are based on the ability to pay it back. And if you don't have a climate that's going to be sustainable and growable in the next 5 to 10 years in a plan, then nobody's going to lend anybody money unless they steal it from Washington, D.C. and Sacramento. So this has to stop, people. It has to stop.
All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite up Jan Perry, the General Manager of Economic and Workforce Development, to provide her report on the Section 108 loan program and recommendations.
Great, thank you. And
good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm joined by our Chief Grants Administrator, Meg Barclay, who's going to make herself available should you wish to drill down on details. So what we're talking to you about today is based on a report which we provided on January the 25th, 2016, regarding our recommendations to administer approximately $69 million available in Section 108 authority for economic development activities. And we had a report prior to that, which was dated November the 18th, that was one of our later iterations of a comprehensive citywide economic development plan. So as you know, when we formed the department, it was a priority for the department, one, to respond to an Office of Inspector General HUD audit to eliminate any potential liability or hit on the general fund. So I immediately went out and sought technical assistance to review our 108 portfolio on department procedures and policies, particularly focusing on underwriting and evaluating outstanding audit findings, and then reconciling our 108 loan balances and resolving any problem loans based on guidance from Housing and Urban Development. And that included issuing notices of default. Now, the Section 108 program guidelines and standards proposed in this report are a result of those previous efforts to manage our portfolio and to develop a very transparent underwriting criteria. So our recommendations are designed to create a transparent, predictable funding process, resulting in what we believe will be a much more stable loan portfolio and provide much better outcomes for the city and a higher rate of loan repayment. The guidelines and financing terms in our report would allow the Department, Economic and Workforce Development Department, to allocate $69 million in Section 108 funding by, and let me just sort of list it out for you, 15% or $10.4 million of that would go to our small business loan program. 60% or $41.4 million would be for our new major project loan program, and then 25% or $17.25 million would be for special projects, things that are not anticipated or don't fall within the parameters of the two previously stated programs. Now, these percentages that we propose is based on a smaller amount of funding needed to recapitalize our small business loan program, and then to allocate the majority or the largest portion, the 60% or the $41.4 million of Section 108 for a HUD-approved reservation for a streamlined process for major projects. And I'll go into the details on that in just a second. And again, leaving some funding for special projects, whatever that might be. Now, the guidelines that we propose would significantly reduce a timeline for funding a major project, and that would be a loan that would be greater than $500,000, and ensure that city Section 108 loans are adequately secured and reliably repaid, which is, we've had some challenges in the past on that. So funding timeline reductions would be achieved by administering major project loans based on a concept of a master application or a reservation, and this would allow for expedited approval from HUD. Now, this is how it works. The department would apply to Housing and Urban Development for the reservation with a description of the program criteria and financing guidelines outlined in this report. Once approved, loan applications that meet the criteria can be approved by the local HUD office without requiring individual approval from HUD in Washington, D.C. as currently required. So we can bundle several loans together at one time and we get local approval. Now, the precedent for that was the small business loan program, and it's currently administered this way, where we put the loans together, bundle them together, if you will, and then HUD local approves in no more than 4 weeks, compared to 4 months for loans that have to be reviewed by Washington, D.C. So there's an incentive and a potential framework. Now, as part of that process, we ensure that the loans are adequately secured and should result in reliable repayment. So we looked at some problems in our loan portfolio and some common problems, some repetitive issues. Just to give you an example, 30% of the loans, which cumulatively added up to $42 million, were either not being repaid or were significantly delayed in their performance requirements for any number of reasons. 8 out of 9 of those loans were for property acquisition. They had long repayment terms, some up to 20 years, and there was no construction financing commitment in place at the time the Section 108 loan closed. So there was a gap in time and none coming behind it. Many cases, the Section 108 loans were spent before the developer had the chance to secure the balance of project financing. And then in other cases, city funds comprised more than 80% of the total value of the project. And in some cases, city funds were the only source of loan funds, with very minimal or negligible developer equity investment, which, as you know, is just not a ratio that we should continue. In contrast, some of the loans in the portfolio with developer equity investment, a healthy ratio, private financing commitments, or a diversity of lending sources enabled a project to be completed on time and generate jobs for the city. And without going into naming names of projects, because there's no reason to do that, a couple of case studies of a poorly performing loan, a commercial construction loan. City loan was 100% of the acquisition and construction finance. Bad idea. Loan term was 20 years. And then delayed repayment tied to project completion. So, you know, it's just bad after bad. The developer had very little financial incentive to complete the project, and the city had little to no leverage to enforce performance schedules. A loan that performed well was a retail development project where public money was 60% of the project financing, and the other sources included developer equity, new market tax credits, so there was some diversity in funding. That project was completed on time, fully leased, and they're repaying their Section 108 on schedule. So we want to also, and you have a handout of our proposed metrics, which I think will be helpful in terms of tracking loans should you wish to adopt this new program, to measure performance of the loans as based on the ordinance that formed this department, increased city revenue, job creation, and number of city work source center clients hired by Section 108 borrowers. And we would obviously report on an annual basis, two times a year annually, on the status of our program. And that includes but doesn't limit us to the description and status of the loans funded and applications in pipeline, the repayment and default rate, and the average processing and review time and remaining authority. So we always know, how much we have left to work with and where it's going. I think you've got the handout on metrics. Okay, great. So just so you know that our proposal on these metrics assumes funding and staffing requests in our 2016-2017 budget request. So, okay.
So 75% of the funding falls into the first two categories would be subject only to local HUD approval. It wouldn't need to go through the long Washington, D.C. process, as I gather it. But the other special projects portion still would. Is that right? So that 25% would still be subject to headquarters approval, and presumably that's because we don't have a clear predetermined definition of what that money is going to
Not
be
yet,
for
no.
by agreement with HUD. Okay.
It's unanticipated.
Yeah. So what would the process be for approval of those special projects loans? Would it be different than the approval for the other categories?
Well, let's. I'm going to.
Internally, not in HUD, but
Since
on
Meg
our
came
end.
from HUD, let me have her explain that to you.
So that could be, those special projects are really intended for, we feel the program criteria for major projects reservation are good and pretty comprehensive, but we understand that there's always something that we didn't think about, and so it's important not to lock up all of that money into the reservations. So those projects could come forward a number of ways. If they were to apply for the major project reservation and didn't qualify under that, we might recommend a loan under the special projects for council approval. If they were to, a council member identifies it's a project in their district that might not meet, again, one of the criteria for a major projects loan. So there's not necessarily one way into that fund.
Okay. So the approval of those special project loans would be subject to council approval, and
Yes.
then it would be there in your semi-annual.
Just like you do
Just
now.
like now.
In your semi-annual reporting back would itemize that
Yes.
as well. So we'd have two levels of review essentially.
And it's important to note, too, we would still want to apply those same financing underwriting standards that are in the term sheet for major projects to those special projects loans. Just, we're not talking about, we still want them to perform well. It's just about whether or not they can get over the program criteria.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you. You mentioned the $42 million in loans that are falling behind or in default. what are the steps to paying those off, and what are the consequences of those defaults?
Well, the consequences, and as I said, when I first came into the department, we had a significant, we were already under review by HUD and the Office of the Inspector General, and so the first thing I did was seek technical assistance. We contacted HUD and said, who would you recommend that we hire as consultants to help bring our portfolio into compliance? Because ultimately, if we didn't, that would be a significant hit on the general fund. So, of course, we didn't want that to happen. So we went through a process for well over a year and a half of how to change our procedures, how to redo our underwriting criteria. And one of the most dramatic things that we had to do as a department is issue notices of default on loans that were in default. And then, trigger people coming in and either, arguing, agreeing to do a workout, because ultimately, if you can't cure your defaults, you go into foreclosure. And so Meg and her team, and they're here today, been actively involved in bringing people into compliance.
So so not all of those 42 million we're ever going to get back, and that's not your fault. I mean, we have better procedures now going forward, but so what happens to those who do go into default, who don't pay it back, or less I'm concerned about what happens to them, but I'm also concerned what happens then, what is the consequences to us and our ability to, if we don't pay that loan back to HUD somehow, we're not only losing that dollar, but we're losing 5 times that amount in borrowing capacity. So it probably behooves us to pay that back even out of general fund or out of another fund of some sort so that we get that leveraged borrowing capacity.
Correct. And also replenish the funds so that we can use it to lend it out on projects that, under the new criteria, if you choose to adopt that, would be arguably viable and would enable us to.
So what do we do? So how do we clear the books?
Well, okay, let me just give him the general answer, and you can go into the details and give him some examples. We pursue each one with an enormous amount of vigor and tenacity to make people comply, make the developers come in and comply with the notice of default. And we do not set them aside. And if
Maybe we get half. I mean, there's no way we're...
No, they're not. I don't know. I don't know that you can say that because some are more recent, some are older, and it depends on how old they are. Whether how much you might have to write something down. But everybody is compelled to come in and try to work through this, because if they don't, then we take it back.
Is there a procedure for writing down what we ultimately decide we can't pay off? Does HUD have a procedure for us to sort of forgive some of those loans, or how does that work?
On the Section 108, on the Section 108, it basically becomes an obligation of the Community Development Block Grant. So that would be just like any other one, like any other CDBG allocation.
It's taken out of next year's 40.
Right.
We don't want that.
Right. It doesn't change our entitlement amount, so it wouldn't change our borrowing capacity. It just would be.
But it will get scored against it.
Yes, exactly.
So-
Exactly. So we have, actually, there's a number of different, these are all in different kinds of, they all have different issues. A lot of them are performance-based, and so they were delayed by the recession, or they lost an anchor tenant before they were able to get their construction financing, those kinds of things. And so we're working on modifying performance schedules, and there's, definitely light at the end of the tunnel on a lot of these. And one of them actually is almost completed, and they're going to open in a couple of weeks. So we're all the way along the spectrum there of the kind of seriousness of these. But as far as 108 goes, there really isn't a way to write it off the way we could with a CDBG loan. We just call it a loss, tell HUD we tried. We really, to make this work. But they actually borrow the money so that they can loan it to us. So we actually they just take it out.
But
of
at this point,
CDBG.
we haven't called any of them a loss, and we continue to fight our way through it.
Is there an estimation in terms of time at what point do we cut our losses? And I mean, I'm assuming that it would be a miracle if we got all 42 million back. So I'm assuming we're going to have to call a loss on some of this money. And what's the timeline for doing that?
We haven't reached a conclusion on that yet.
Yeah.
We're still pushing to try to collect as much as we can and to get people to come in and comply.
We're pretty hopeful that most of these projects, if they actually begin construction, are completed, they'll be able to repay. We're re-underwriting as they're rescoping them and making sure that they're in a position to repay. In a couple of situations, they're bringing developer equity in to make the project whole so that it can move forward. We do have, leverage on a few of them. We are the first trust deed, so we have some significant security.
Some of the developers just need to go out and work a little harder to bring equity in from somewhere else because they had not been forced to do that in the past. So, it's a new day and they're being required to lift a little more than they're used to.
Right, and presumably some of these developers have equity that they haven't gone under, and we have access to that, and we have the legal system. So,
Right.
Yeah.
so that's good. I'm more optimistic about that after.
Oh, you should be very
Yeah.
optimistic. This is much, much, much better than it was prior to, yes.
Oh, clear. No, that I
Yeah.
get 100%. I wasn't, but I mean, I'm optimistic about maybe we'll see some of this money. I was assuming we wouldn't see very much of this.
No, I don't think that's necessarily the risk. Really, the thing that we're trying to mitigate, obviously, we want loans that repay, but also the amount of staff time it takes to get together with developers on these and really evaluate the project again when we've already, gone through that once is really significant and keeps us from having the capacity to really go out and find new projects and new borrowers.
So our objective is to get the projects built, make sure the developers perform, and repay our loans so we can go out and re-leverage. So that's the goal. The goal isn't to write them off.
Right. I appreciate that and share that. And is there a way moving forward where you can build into the interest of these loans some, assumption? There's going to be some bad loans at some point. Normal lenders, they build into their percentage interest. Normal lenders, traditional banks. Not that the city's not normal. They build in a certain percentage of the interest to cover those losses. Is there any legal way for us to do something like that, or is it even advisable?
I don't know if HUD allows that. Does HUD allow
Well,
that?
we do take over and above our cost of funds to HUD, so the interest that HUD charges us. We do include an additional interest rate to the borrower to reasonable extent, and that's more based on the term of the loan and the risk of the loan. So we are able to collect a little bit of extra interest on each of these loans that we do hold on to for reasons for things like that. Oftentimes, or in one particular case, that's covering the cost of a trustee to pursue and to record a notice of default and pursue an actual foreclosure. But that's typically what those funds end up being set aside for. But if the program starts to, we start making more loans and generating a little more interest on those, that is definitely a
We'll
use
have
of
more
those
of our
funds.
money reserve.
Yeah, we could go there if we needed to.
'Cause I would assume that would be a goal to figure out what our default rate is going to be.
Yeah.
Obviously, as low as we want it,
What's
and have
acceptable.
enough of a.
Yeah, I
funds
suspect
set
that
aside.
that's something that would be highly favored by HUD too.
Okay. And is it something that's in the works in this process to add that?
We can
sort of line?
incorporate that.
Well, it's certainly, unless there's a reason why not to, it's certainly.
No, there's no
there's
reason not to.
I mean, urge us to do that.
Yeah, okay.
And I would just add one other good reason to do it. It would allow us a benchmark by which we can compare with other cities as well,
Right.
who are administrating similar programs. It might be a way to diagnose whether or not there are other changes that we can do to prevent default and to have more reliability in the program. So I think that's a good recommendation for sure. Mr. Price.
Thank you. Well, it's exciting to know that we're making some changes that are really going to be quantifiable and that will really go to the bottom line. What kind of interest rate normally is attached on these 108 loans? Is it some points over the?
Yeah, so typically, we get charged so the way that the Section 108 works, when we first take out the loan, it's in a variable rate, and that's basically 3-month LIBOR plus 20 basis points. It's not very much, it's a little less than 1%. And then we charge the attachments 1 and 2 to the Section 108 report on the term sheets show sort of for small business loans, we charge a little bit over our cost of funds. So for small business loans, just one second, I don't know it off the top of my head. but it would be that HUD rate plus, where am I missing it?
It's on page 3. Page 3.
Page 3?
You're looking at your.
Where is it? I can't
No,
find it. Anyways,
I have a different set
so
of
we
notes.
charge, I think it's somewhere between 2 and 3% over
It's
the,
2.58.
oh, is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad that we're making it easier to access these
2.5%.
funds. I'm glad we're making it easier to access these funds and to make them available, because this is now the city's premier business loan program, basically, right?
Yeah, so it'd be that rate plus 2.5%
Okay, all right.
on the small
I
business.
know that we're setting aside about 10 million for small businesses, however we define that. What about micro businesses? I know we talked about a micro fund. Is that part of this, or could it be, or?
108's not the best use of funds, or not the best source of funds for a microloan because of the sort of administrative additional need to go to HUD for each individual. We still have to go to local for each individual loan, even under a reservation. So it's not, it'd be better, we've actually made a proposal, we've made proposals for actually both general fund and CDBG, which are better sources of funding for a microloan program, just because of that. It's already, when you're looking at all the paper that goes with city money, it's already pretty prohibitive to do smaller loans with that amount of money, but then adding that extra step is just not.
Even to an intermediary who would then?
Yeah, they'd still have to come to us, and then we'd have to go to HUD. We tried that, actually, for even the small business loan fund. We tried that a few years ago with VEDC, and it was too cumbersome for
It's
them.
too
They gave the money
labor-intensive
back,
for the amount of
actually.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, hopefully this is a much more transparent process and one that operates smoother and folks can accelerate.
We're hopeful.
Okay, well, thank you. So, members, and by the way, thank you, Ms. Perry, for the submission of the metrics. That's not going to be part of our discussion today,
Yeah,
but it's
understand.
certainly welcome as
Yeah.
we are preparing for the budget hearings coming up. So we have a number of ongoing reporting on issues affecting EWDD. There's a few things that are still outstanding. Is Mr. Wickham still here? Didn't see him. He was there just a moment ago. Okay, well, we're still waiting on a few reports back, I think primarily from CLA on EWDD's proposed strategic plan with CLA's recommendations on that, as well as the economic development element of the general plan. So that's not a part of what we're doing today, but we are still waiting for those reports back for consideration, hopefully at our next meeting, if not our March meeting. All right, but what's before us today are the recommendations, members, on 108 loans that are contained, recommendations number 1 through 7 in the January 25th report from the general manager, and I'd move that we adopt those recommendations. And if there's no objection, that'll be the action of the committee, and then to facilitate that, I'd like to instruct the clerk to create a sub-file for all reports relating to Section 108 programs and any subsequent council actions relating to those programs within this council file. Okay, and that'll be the action of the committee.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That brings us then to item number 2, relating to a motion for reports regarding the streamlining of procurement. And I'd like to invite up the representatives of the CAO's office, GSD, ITA, ConAd, as well as the mayor's office representatives on this matter. And members, this was a motion that I brought with Ms. Martinez, basically trying to identify how we can streamline the contracting process with the city. It's incredibly cumbersome and difficult for even local businesses with knowledge of the way the city operates to find their way through the gauntlet of the procurement process. So it's especially helpful for small businesses locally. It's especially important for minority and women-owned businesses that don't necessarily have the full gamut of lobbyists and expediters and lawyers and everything else to get their way through this process. It would be especially helpful for those businesses to streamline this process, make it much more simple, much more time efficient, and also to expedite not only the application process, but also our payment process with those businesses that do contract with the city. So this is the beginning of the conversation. I don't expect a full report now, but I understand that we have made some pretty good strides in at least identifying some of the issues that will be reported to us today. So good afternoon. Good afternoon. Who's going to kick us off?
Well, they're all looking down on me, so I guess I will.
All right.
My name is John Trev-Goda. I'm with the Department of General Services. The general manager of the Department of General Services serves as the purchasing agent for all the council-controlled departments for commodity bids, and that's really an important distinction. When we're talking about procurement and today's meeting, we really have multiple avenues. We have procurement contracts, procurement orders, and we have personal services contracts. So I'm here to discuss the commodity buys and tell you a little bit about the history and where we're going with that respect. 15 to 20 years ago, we went through a re-engineering and a consolidation within the supply chain function where all of the commodity purchasing was centralized and all the warehouse activities was centralized, and as a result, all of the payments associated with commodity buys were centralized within the Department of General Services. Since that time, we've implemented several innovative, at the time it was innovative, and now you see more and more municipalities doing what we started several years ago and picking up in activities such as e-procurement, cooperative purchasing. We're leveraging technology and looking at services such as Smart Procure and Product Bio to try to get the best price and the best commodities for the council control departments. Just to give you some perspective, our department handles approximately $480 million worth of purchases a year. We establish annual annual contracts that are used by all of the council control departments to order common items such as your pens, papers, automotive supplies, etc. Those account for about 80% of the orders that are made by the city. By setting up these annual contracts, it allows the end users to quickly get the items they need in their hands without having to go through a bid process. We've already taken care of that for them. We have a warehouse system in place where we have $18 million of inventory on hand. Again, these are all common used items that are available to the city departments. Payments, we process approximately $440 million worth of payments each year. We capture about 93.6% of the available payment discounts to us. So that's money back to the city.
What percentage was that?
93.6%. We pride ourselves at paying our vendors as quickly as possible. We average approximately 22 days for payments. And actually, we could do more. We could pay quicker, but there's a council motion that has instructed us to slow down a little bit so that we retain the money in the city coffers and we're not paying quite as quick. So double-edged sword because we want to keep our suppliers happy. So, I'm very proud that we've taken.
Wait. Go back for a minute. Is that in fact the current policy of the city? What is that? Define that for me. To slow it down in what way?
Well, by holding the money in the city's coffers, we're earning interest on it, and we're not. We're still complying with the payment terms for our contract. So we would pay instead of net 30, we would pay on the 30th day instead of paying on the 15th day, which we could potentially do. So by retaining that money in the city's coffers,
it is very unlikely that the 15 days of interest that we're going to gain from doing that is as valuable as the prepayment discounts that we might get for early pay, isn't it?
cannot disagree with you on that, and that was a previous council instruction, and
See, you learn something every day, members. That's it.
yeah.
Anna, make a note of that for Mr. Hale, please. All right. Sorry, didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
no, you're fine. You're fine. My point is that, we're efficient. We look for ways of becoming more efficient every day, and we welcome this opportunity to share what we've gone through with commodities and hopefully improve the contracting process for service contracts as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
It sounds like a good segue for me to jump in. John Riemer, the Director of the Bureau of Contract Administration, council members, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to come and share. The Bureau of Contract Administration has been identified by the council to serve as a designated administrative agency over many of the ordinances that you have in place that oversee and are utilized in the contracting process. So as GSD, they spoke to in the procurement side, and I'm not going to speak to construction, just on the procurement side, how the process works. And as you alluded to, Councilmember Krikorian, with respect to wanting to provide opportunities, our task primarily is to review and to oversee the process with respect to the ordinances. Are they being applied? Are the businesses that are doing work and entering into contracts with the city following through on things that council has said they'd like to see, be it through a living wage or an equal benefits, a first source hiring. Many of these ordinances, they fall into our purview, and so we're tasked with making sure that compliance takes place. This is involved in the contracting process. I will refer to them now as a hurdle or a barrier. And not every hurdle is a bad hurdle. So for us, what we're looking at is how can we not necessarily eliminate, but lower the hurdle? How can we help businesses clear these hurdles? Back in 2001, the Department of Public Works, we looked at saying we want to have a diverse contracting environment. And we want to make sure that we don't have anything in place that's going to unnecessarily interfere with those businesses being able to come, do business with us, stimulate, if you will, the economy. So what can we do? And we came up with this tool that we refer to as the electronic marketplace in our house, known as Bobbin, the Business Assistance Virtual Network. What we saw that was that there was a lot of paperwork involved in this process, and all well-meaning, making sure that people are paid properly, making sure that opportunities exist. All of these ordinances have their place and have their purpose. So it wasn't a case for us to, how can we eliminate the ordinance? The case was, how can we streamline the process? How can we facilitate moving quickly through this review and check process to make sure that contractors were complying with what council said they'd like to see, and in the process of complying, they were not impacted negatively in going through the contracting process and opportunities, so that it would discourage some, especially, as you alluded to earlier, the smaller businesses. How can these smaller businesses do this? Technology was the key that we felt would help tremendously in making this go a lot quicker. Working with the mayor's office from the streamlining perspective, because this clearly was something that we all wanted to make happen. And I'm using the word clear over and over again because that's the acronym we actually came up with, clear contracting. How can we eliminate inconsistency that we saw taking place amongst many departments? How can we bring about a level playing field that did not exist? The playing field was tilted in many respects. If you were a smaller business, it might be much more difficult for you to come into this process. How could we educate those that were somewhat ambiguous approaches in the minds of many, bringing about access for the stakeholders, because we did want a diverse contracting environment, and doing business with responsible contractors and not those contractors that were not necessarily complying with many of the ordinances that we had in place. Clear contracting was the approach that we focused on. And then we had a commissioner that took up the mantle, Commissioner Monica Rodriguez, that said, you know what, we have this tool, Bobbin. Let's enhance it. Let's bolster it. And so we've been working with ITA to have this, if you will, leveling of the playing field, bringing about a consistent approach where all the departments in the city would move into this environment. It would serve as a means for educating so that everyone would know, be it large or small, what was going on, what was expected. It brought about transparency so that we could increase our access for those small businesses, those women-owned businesses, those minority businesses. And then it would also help us identify those contractors that were not responsible. They were not doing what we believe needed to be done and we wanted done in our contracting environment. It is moving in the direction that we think it has a lot of promise. With anything that has value, it has cost. And part of our dialogue, I imagine, should be to discuss that. But we think it's a worthwhile investment to help facilitate the streamlining approach that the mayor's office has been helping us with greatly. And then this, again, clear contracting, not getting rid of hurdles, but lowering hurdles so that everyone can clear them and achieve what they ultimately want. It's a cutting of red tape. It really is. And we've seen its success. We're in the process now of amending ordinances for many of the ordinances that we have in place that are directly related to contracting, so as to take us to that next step, bringing about the consistency and helping things go a lot smoother.
Terrific.
So now I pass the baton to
Thank you.
I'll take it. Ted Ross, General Manager with the city's Information Technology Agency. So certainly, we're proud sponsors and proud partners with General Services, Bureau of Contract Administration, Mayor's Office, and many others. We help run some of the systems that are certainly involved in the purchasing process. So General Services currently uses the supply management system, which is being replaced with the city's existing financial management system. So here's an example in which we're consolidating two major systems, in which you've got purchasing in one system, and you've got services and service, so you have commodities and services in two separate systems being consolidated this next year. And so this next year we will have the implementation of the city's financial system with procurement and purchasing involved. We also support the BAVIN system that was described by John. We face a lot of the challenges that other departments face, but we face sometimes them uniquely because we're in information technology. So a lengthy contract development is problematic in some areas. It's especially problematic. So if you have a situation where it takes over 400 days to implement a new technology, it very quickly either becomes an old technology, or by the time of implementation, it's not the right technology or not done at the right time. So it's certainly very difficult for us. Time to market is extremely important for us, and this certainly gets in the way. I think sometimes the city's terms and conditions, from our perspective, also are out of sync at times with industry norms. So as we're trying to negotiate contracts with vendors throughout the industry who are used to certain terms and conditions, it becomes very difficult for them to work with the city of Los Angeles, and sometimes, honestly, we don't end up with the right vendor or the best vendor for those reasons. We also run into issues of having great difficulty in using federal and state master contracts. So while one could try to piggyback on an existing contract with GSA or through the state of California, et cetera, that we're already negotiating and already have some options and availability, it's typically become very difficult for us to leverage it because of additional terms and conditions items that are applied on top of it. I know there's complexities to this. I know certainly city attorney and CEO and others would be able to weigh in on that. But various other municipalities with relative ease can leverage existing contracts that have already been negotiated at a federal or state level, and we run into that issue at the ITA. And we run into the aspect that generally speaking, the city, we have a somewhat disintegrated process. We have a process in which we use our BAVIN system to effectively publish and show opportunities, but then as a department starts to do contract award and contract negotiation, it falls into the department itself to then go through a process in which no system exists for some of the workflow and a review and approval to then end up in the financial system at some point to be awarded as a contract and to have payments. So it's not exactly a seamless process, and we know from a technology perspective there's probably a lot to be done, both process and technology. I think certainly, as John was mentioning, BAVIN is probably a prime example, the Business Assistance Virtual Network, in which since 2001 we've worked very closely with Mayor's Office and with Bureau of Contract Administration, and recently we've got a working group chaired by Public Works Commissioner Monica Rodriguez to really tackle issues with BAVIN and try to make key improvements into it. From our perspective, BAVIN really has three main goals. Number one is access to city opportunities. It's extremely important that city opportunities be made available, and every business, small, medium, large, whoever they may be, local or international, whoever they may be, have access to know what the city has available. So it's our primary advertising tool under Executive Directive 14. Second one would be promoting communication with businesses and between businesses. It's an opportunity for us to email notifications when opportunities arrive. So you can sign up for it and receive emails of things you may want to bid on or not want to bid on. It's an opportunity for prime contractors to reach out to subcontractors to complement their bids. So it's a way of driving maybe Weeby and other types of specialized businesses to be a part of a larger contract's bid. It's an opportunity for subcontractors to find prime contractors. It's an opportunity for companies to submit compliance forms in advance. So these are the types of things built into BAVN over the last couple of years. And thirdly, it's an opportunity to ensure transparency. It's information about contract awards can be posted publicly, as well as it's opportunity for primes to reach out to subs and to store all of that in the BAVN system so they can document that they did the efforts and the due diligence that they're required to do. So in many ways, BAVN, which started off as a simple website, in fact, little side note, when I was looking over at the staff, and I'm not sure if the council members are familiar with it, there's a website called the Internet Wayback Machine. And it's an opportunity where you'd put in labavn.org, and if you hit enter, it'll show you different times in which they took a snapshot of the site. So we could go back to 2004 and 2005, and if you click on the proper link, it'll show you what the site looked like back then. And you could actually see the development of BAVN from its early foundings all the way up to where it stands today. And in a lot of ways, the city has made a lot of improvements and a lot of benefits and added a lot. Doesn't mean we still don't have a long way to go, but we've made a lot of improvements. And so in that working group, chaired by Commissioner Monica Rodriguez from Public Works Board, is where we start to apply and attack some of the key areas. So one of the aspects has really to do with governance and direction. Absent the working group, it's very difficult to say who's in charge. We work with Public Works Bureau of Contract Administration and Mayor's Office, but you often get weigh-in from various different departments and various different elected officials. So certainly for us, it's very important that regardless of the improvements made in procurement, the city could try to, as much as possible, have a clear voice so that the technology can be built around our priorities. And so I think that's an extremely important aspect. Secondly is modernizing the look and feel. So we're working with steps right now in that working group, and we're working on enhancements targeted to be done by the end of this fiscal year, by June 2016, in which it shows the step-by-step registration, has the right language. The mayor's office has applied, and I'm sure they can speak more to it. For Signature Creative has gotten involved to show what it should look like, so it's more user-friendly and more usable from the business perspective, as well as revised electronic forms and e-signature, so people aren't having to sign things, scan things, mail things in, etc., so they could really do things digitally with us. And integrating BAVN with any other new system. So the mayor's office is looking to a new business portal, as well as changes in our LA tax compliance system. And as you can imagine, from a business perspective and from a usability perspective, it's very important that you can go seamlessly between different sites, potentially even using the very same login, so that you're not stuck going from checkpoint to checkpoint in which they may not connect or interconnect. I think user experience is probably the primary factor that makes the city systems positive or negative when it comes to a small business perspective. Those planned enhancements, we're working very closely, like we said, as well as certainly some more detailed items there to improve our BAVN system. But I think there's a lot of other good capabilities both in the BAVN system to make improvements, as well as the financial management system to do online bid submission and other aspects. So as technology folks, as the tech folks, the tech geeks, our perspective is get that right working group together, make sure we're working with the right people. We can build really good things with support from council and the mayor's office. We can integrate it across different systems, and we can really make it hum. That's really, from our perspective, what we'd like to be able to deliver, and we've tried to deliver in the past.
Jody Oxheimer with the CAO. So similar to our place in the process, I'm concluding this part of the presentation. The CAO looks at contracts at the request of mayor and council. There are a couple of authorities that have been delegated to the CAO. So the mayor has delegated to the CAO the authority to approve contracts that are less than $25,000 or under 3 months. The council has delegated to the CAO the authority to make findings in accordance with Charter Section 1022 that it's more economical or more feasible to contract than to provide services by city employees. Other than that, we primarily look at cost, scope, and compliance with city requirements that you've heard a little bit about. So sometimes a department will request approval to execute a contract before the con ad staff have completed their due diligence to make sure that the contractor has in fact complied with the city requirements. And so the CAO will work with the department, with the city attorney, with Con Ed, with other staff to make sure that those requirements are being met. I do want to add the city risk manager located in the CAO also looks at contracts to ensure compliance adherence with city standards, particularly related to insurance and indemnification.
Thank you. Mr. Ross, you were talking about some of the standard terms and conditions that a lot of the industry is uncomfortable with or unfamiliar with. Can you embellish that a little bit, explain what, or some examples of that?
Certainly, and I know my staff can detail them even better, but we run into certain terms at times where in the case of a lawsuit, in case of an issue, city attorney will sometimes require that they represent, and often the industry companies that we work with, in the case of a lawsuit or in case of an issue, they want to be able to represent themselves in those conditions. There's various other conditions. Just recently, we had two very large contracts that we haven't even been able to, one of them competitive, we haven't even been able to resolve some of the contract issues because the terms and conditions were just too extensive from their perspective. And as we reached out to Gartner Consulting, which is a nationwide, even a global IT consulting firm, very large, who will help weigh in, and they provide various advice, we asked and said, here's some of the terms and conditions that we're asking for. How does this fit when it comes to the rest of the industry? And generally speaking, we're extremely stringent in key areas, and so it precludes us sometimes of being able to land a contract. And these are sometimes with very large organizations who you think would be able to make the adjustments necessary.
And somewhat related to that, Mr. Riemer, I know you've talked for years about the disclosures that are required during the bidding process by bidders, and they're extensive, and a lot of the representations that need to be made to comply with council priorities and requests of the past, they accrue over time, and there's never a look back, really, where we say, do we still need that one? Has that been supplanted by federal law? Is it redundant now? Is that, we never really take the time to review that. They just keep accumulating in our requirements of our bid packages. So as you're looking at this and proposing new amendments and so on, are you looking at those sorts of things? We're the policymakers, I get it, but sometimes we need to be reminded that maybe this policy is no longer necessary because it's dealt with in some other area of the law, for example, or maybe some of these terms and conditions that we require as a standard matter are obsolete, or is there some review process? But the technological solutions are terrific, but underlying those technological solutions and the need for them is the substance of, we ask for a lot from bidders, and maybe we don't need to ask for so much. Maybe we can get rid of some of that stuff if it's outlived its usefulness.
A great question. The first approach that we took was to, again, bring about some consistency in the many ordinances that we have. It's been a while since we've been able to move to the place where we are now, bringing before council amendments to several of the ordinances that we have involved in the contracting process. The next step, at which we have been doing some looking, is to make some recommendations with respect to can we do things differently? Do we still need this particular ordinance? The great leap that we've taken is that there was a time when many of these documents were submitted by hand, and they had to fill them out, they had to mail them to us, and we've gone to an affidavit process to minimize them having to do that. They can attest to the fact that they're in compliance based on looking at what we're asking for, and for many of our businesses, it's been past a breath of fresh air. It's been the windows wide open. Thank you very much. We appreciate this. So that's one thing, being able to preserve inside of our system the history so we don't have to do this over and over again. Extending the dates, if you will, for how long we will accept your documentation instead of having to do it annually, where it's good for 3 years. The things that we can do without having to bring back to you right away, because that does take some research and time, a change, that's what Bobbin has helped us do, where it might take a long time, and I don't have the numbers before you, to review. We're able to turn around a request now within a day as we get this information, simply because of what Bobbin's enables to do, so that the technology and the consistency have gone hand in hand. I am hearing you, and we are doing that. It's not part of this presentation, but I embrace and share with you the importance of making sure that we come before you as a DAA and share with you areas where we believe we can modify, I'll use that term, several of the ordinances that we have in place, just for consideration's sake, and these are the reasons why.
And I don't expect it now. I mean, this is only the first consideration of this motion. There will be a more extensive report back, but as part of this process, I would certainly urge that by all parties. If there are things that you just think have outlived their usefulness, those are the sorts of things that should come to our attention so we can make that informed decision. Members? Mr. Price.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I'm excited about Bobbin and the real progress that's been made over the past several years and really refining it as a tool, using it as a tool. How can we further refine it, if you will, to either to track or to monitor or to encourage more minority, disadvantaged, veteran, women-owned businesses to take advantage of the contracting opportunities? How can Bobbin be adapted, or what needs to happen to really make it a more comprehensive tool for not just outreach, but also for tracking, for monitoring, for measuring?
Why don't we both respond? I just want to have a little piece in this. The key is transparency. What Bobbin will bring that I would argue we didn't have before is an opportunity for everyone to see what's happening. And you as a small business can know where you are in the process with respect to what you've submitted. Has it been received and reviewed? We want to go to that place. It opens the door for everyone to have access to it, no matter where you might be. As Mr. Ross alluded to earlier, you can see contracting opportunities that exist. We're still moving in the direction, but getting there a lot quicker. All of the departments in the city utilizing it. Back to the consistency piece. We want all of our departments utilizing Bobbin so that you are a contractor looking at the city of Los Angeles. You're not looking at a department standing alone.
Is it currently mandatory or just optional? Okay, that tells you we need some work to do.
Mandatory. We believe it's an excellent tool, and the departments are moving in that direction.
All right.
I don't want to.
But you don't have full compliance yet across the board.
Right.
Total.
And I don't want to say
complete.
that in the sense that there is a reluctance or a desire not to.
Yeah.
Again, we take on the responsibility of sharing this with all of the departments. Years ago, we did a survey, and this will sound like an excuse. I don't mean it to be that way, but we are dealing with the reality that there is an attrition for many of the departments. Maintaining individuals that we will refer to as contract coordinators can be challenging for many departments. And so keeping that one person that's connected to the process, it's not as easy as we'd like for it to be. That's the other reason why we want a tool like this. I mean, can you imagine having the tool where you start with a department you've been tasked with helping to put a contract together or go through the process of renewing one, and you can walk up to your computer and turn on what would be the equivalent of a TurboTax in contracting, and it just takes you through the process. And the terms and conditions that Mr. Ross alluded to, the city attorney's already reviewed them. We have templates in place. You just pick and pull, and you move on. These are the opportunities that we envision can happen, Ted.
Sure. Very well said, John. I think the philosophical intent of business inclusion a few years ago was to be able to create those connections between primes and subs. You'll have some very powerful primes who are required to reach out. I just have a statistic here. Just in 2015, there were 451,000 documented outreaches between prime and subcontractors. And so for minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, it's a great opportunity to pre-certify in that BAVN system so you're up there on a list and that a prime can interact and reach out to you and vice versa. So I think it's a very powerful ability to do that virtually as opposed to having to know I know a guy or I know a lady and have to be able to create those connections physically when we're in a city with almost 4 million people across 469 square miles. So I think that's one way to do it. And I think to be able to promote opportunities for small and local businesses, especially those that are disadvantaged, I think is their ability to sign up for that. So one aspect is the system's ability to support that, which we're delivering. I think the second aspect is get the publicity out there and to make sure that these very valuable businesses are a part of the process.
Well, again, it's not part of this report, but I think we should be using technology as much as we can to help increase the output, the outreach, and to measure the results, see how we're doing, see if, who's getting these contracts and how we can help spread that around a little bit more. So I look forward to working with this committee, Mr. Chair, and yours, Mr. Bloomfield, as we try to come up with a strategy and the tools that we can all use that are being used consistently across the board so that we can compare apples to apples and make sure we're getting some good apple juice.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's right.
Thanks. I certainly agree with you, and am excited by the idea of improving our technology so that we can streamline the contracting process. I've thought since the beginning that this is sort of in addition to some of the substantive issues, that technology will be the way to, sort of the backdoor way to improve our contracting. Now, BAVN's been around, BAVN or BAVN, depending, tomato, for a couple of years now. And so then the question is, when do we get to that next level where it really is, pushing the contracting to that more streamlined level? It's already done a tremendous amount, and you've talked about that. And we're talking about some of the promises of it. And I'm trying to get a sense of what the timeline is for some of the improvements that we've talked about, and frankly, some of the improvements that maybe we can envision, and to get those on the table as well. I mean, even connecting with our open data movement. And I don't know how much of the contracting is currently, of BAVN is open to the public. There's obviously proprietary information in contracting, but sunshine's a great disinfectant too. And how much of that can we get online for the general public to see as well?
I think one of the issues we run into is that we've been building things up, but unfortunately still in silos. So we build up our financial system and our purchasing system to be able to process things once a contract already exists, to be efficient, to do electronic payments, et cetera. We build our BAVN system on a front end, and then we end up in a middle category in which no system even exists, as John was describing, around building contracts and negotiating contracts, et cetera.
And does BAVN even talk to FMS and SMS?
Generally speaking, no. Generally speaking, the BAVN system is releasing opportunities, showing that opportunities were closed. Then you end up kind of in a system black hole in which departments are negotiating and working through all these processes. And that's a core piece where really no technology exists, or at least it's within each department. And then once it's an approved contract and contracts awarded, it now shows up in the financial system, now shows up in purchasing. Having something from soup to nuts, I think, is extremely important. So for near term, there are improvements being made in the look and feel, the usability, the electronic forms, and the e-signatures on the BAVN side, and those are being targeted for this fiscal year. So fortunately, Council went ahead and approved budget in which we were working very closely with the working group to deliver on those items. The financial system is consuming the purchasing system, so it's all one, and that'll be next year.
We just dumped a lot of money into that.
Absolutely. And so once again, a big thank you to council members in regards to supporting these. They may not sound sexy, but these are really important projects. Systems that are processing almost $500 million in commodity purchases alone, being done by all sorts of different city departments. These are really big, really bolster, really back-end powerful systems. I think really where a lot of the opportunity presents itself is then to start to create that soup to nuts in which you have an integration of a BAVN system in which these can even be separate systems, but they integrate Bavin to an intermediary system or sets of systems, or it's all a part of Bavin, whatever one wants to call it, in which you start to approach the contract management side that then ends up in the financial system. We are building, getting greater capabilities. The new financial management system can allow things like online bids and these other kinds of capabilities. They are in the system, but they need to be configured and turned on to leverage it. So I think there's tremendous opportunity being developed from the technology perspective that we are focusing on short term, but we as a city are going to want to wrap our minds around the long-term benefits so that we're always working towards a strategic roadmap, and it will always be in a better place year after year.
And will that roadmap be part of this report ultimately?
We would love to partner and to provide a roadmap as a part of this report, something in which we could work with Bureau of Contract Administration and General Services and Mayor's Office and CAO and start to have a discussion of how technology can provide it. Because without a roadmap, we'll be where we were 3 years ago, we were 3 years before that. So I think there's a lot to be said of stepping up and looking and saying, where do we want to go? Because technology is agnostic. It'll do what you want it to do. And the application of good technology is figuring out where we want to go from a policy and a process perspective, and then using those fantastic tools that are out there to be able to make that happen.
So I would specifically ask, I know the main part of this is looking at the immediate streamlining and contracting issues, but we get the brain trust here together to also include as part of this roadmap of how do we create that intermediary system, how do we have a system that talks to itself, either integrated or one system or systems that can integrate in a positive way.
I think, Councilmember, you hit the nail on the head. And in a lot of ways, what's great about technology is you'll think you're in one system, but you're really across multiple. And so often when you're dealing with banking at Chase Bank or in other areas, it all looks and feels the same. It all feels like a unified user experience when they're often jumping across multiple systems, sometimes in various places in the world. But from the user perspective, it needs to be simple, it needs to be streamlined, it needs to be clean, and it needs to be very useful on the back end for city staff who are managing it.
And on the open data side of this, is part of the plan to get more of this information on the front end publicly available?
I'm going to take a look at my developer. Jason, give me a nod if I'm wrong or not. Do we have any integration in which we're pushing Bavin opportunities or anything into the open data portal currently? Okay, so to confirm, all city opportunities are also published as data sets onto our open data portal.
But in terms of tracking, if company X is pursuing a contract, John Q. Public can't see that.
That is correct. That is not information that we currently have in our open data portal.
And I guess I would want to know how much of that could be seen or could we include into the process without violating proprietary issues and those kinds of things, but to make that public could be part of the improvement, maybe not the streamlining of the contracting process.
We have no issues reporting back on that. I think sometimes the issue we run into from the Bavin perspective is while we do a great job publishing information, and we often don't necessarily have all the interaction to show which companies have actually submitted and applied for in the Bavin system. So sometimes it becomes voluntary from a department perspective, and quite often if something's voluntary, it doesn't always get people participating. And segue in the ethics database conversation when it comes to folks who have been submitting applications, et cetera, and businesses who are competing for it. That's another leg of a extended procurement conversation and systems associated with it.
Kind of a random question, not random, but John, you were talking about commodities and the contracting process for that, and I know we do a certain amount of things through reverse auctions, yes, which are very, very productive ways, new ways to get the best pricing on issues. How does that contracting process, does that need to be streamlined as well? Does that get folded into it? Is it something completely different? And how much are we really doing on the reverse auction side?
Well, reverse auction is another tool in our toolbox for what we call strategic sourcing. So when it is appropriate, when we feel it's in the city's best interest, we will pull that tool out and we will use it. It's not a good tool to use all the time. There are other opportunities, like we talked about. Cooperative purchasing or piggybacking with other municipalities that may serve as a better mechanism. So what we do is an extensive research and look to see what makes the most sense before we go out to bid. and oftentimes reverse auction is the tool we'll pick. I don't have the numbers in terms of savings or numbers of reverse auction activities we've done in the last year. I can certainly provide that. I can tell you overall, all of our strategic sourcing activities, last year we saved in excess of $700,000.
From a contracting perspective, does that need to be folded into this report too, or is it?
I don't believe so, because like I say, it's a tool for bidding for commodities that we use, and it's not applicable 100% of the time.
Okay. And last question I'll ask is just sort of comparing best practices as you do this report to other nearby cities and getting a sense of how we stack up. It sounds like we're doing a lot of forward thinking, but there may be some other cities nearby that have cracked this nut a little bit, and as long as we're doing this report, we might as well get a sense of where our neighbors, friends, and foes are stacking up as well.
And in fact, not even necessarily our neighbors, including some of the larger cities in America too that have the same exact challenges. And along those lines, just one specific issue in comparison to other cities. You mentioned, Mr. Ross, the difficulty in leveraging existing federal and state contracts. Why do we have more trouble with that than other cities do?
I think the short answer is we have a lot more terms and conditions that have to be laid on top of that. And so the other municipalities have a much easier chance of taking a federal or state contract and with minimal adjustments leveraging it and creating a contract themselves. At the City of Los Angeles, we find it much, much, much more difficult to do that.
It's kind of the same issue that we discussed before. And again, if the state of California determines that a certain set of terms and conditions are adequate to protect the taxpayers of California in contracting, then perhaps we could parallel those terms and conditions and not have some of those challenges.
And we certainly defer to our city attorney and CAO risk managers to identify core key pieces that we want to make sure that the city is not exposed in any way,
Sure.
shape, or form. But I believe you're exactly right. These are master contracts being leveraged at a state level, at a federal level, being used by Department of Defense and Bureau of Interior and all these other folks. We would like to think that we should be relatively close in the sense of being able to do the same types of things ourselves off of those contracts.
All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your input. And we also have now members of presentation by the Mayor's Office on procurement. So I'd like to ask the Mayor's team to come on up. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Councilman. This is our second presentation to this committee. What's great about the Economy and Jobs Committee is it's consistent with two of the projects of the Mayor's Operations Innovation Team. And so what we'll give is that roadmap that we've all spoken about, where we've essentially been established to lead and fill that void where there is no centralized procurement leadership, to think about how we actually move the city toward the right approach. We understand procurement is much more than just processes and ordinances and the city buying things. It actually is really making sure we can be the best customer we can be. And so what we've actually done as a team is we've appointed someone you all may be familiar with, Shannon from the city clerk's office, who's actually our project lead on the initiative. And so she'll give you an overview on what we've determined thus far and our path forward.
Good afternoon, council members. Real briefly, we'll go over some of the information that you've already heard, and that's to first address the fact that there was a major reform effort done back in the 90s by GSD, but again, that really focused on the commodity side. So we recognize that there's a big opportunity to look at the services side, as it is one of our largest components of spend. We know that success of the procurement process is going to touch on a lot of different things. It's not going to just touch on commodities or just services, but then bleed into our technology, construction, as well as various talent and innovation, and also public and private partnerships. We recognize that one of the challenges is that we need a holistic structural leadership to drive integrated citywide metrics, performance, and leverage scale, both again, on commodity side as well as services. We recognize that because the services are decentralized among 40 different departments, that departments are not always aligned to execute best practices. Vendors really don't have a central point to begin the process, depending on who they want to contract with. The performance metrics and timeline goals, they're really not existent. So the vendor nor the department really knows what to expect, often resulting in a 432-day process to execute a contract. And we know that vendors also have to compensate for that and build in higher prices if they compete for our business at all. So we recognize that with an $8.2 billion spend that there's huge operational opportunity. We've noted and heard earlier that both GSD and ConAd, our Public Works, are examples of how the city has positively impacted the city's procurement processes. To the right is actually a response to a bid. And we took a picture of how much paper it requires to respond to one of our bids or our request for proposal. We also recognize that the bigger issue is how it feeds into our economic opportunity. We can increase the openness of the city's procurement process and improve the vendor and supplier accessibility. We know we need to support the city's small businesses and emerging businesses, as well as leverage the city's capacity to serve as an innovative emerging concept. Our communications and data analyst will speak to the next few slides, and that will be done by Juan Vasquez.
Cool. Hello, council members. Thank you for your time. So we've anchored our approach in three main areas: quantifying the city's procurement metrics, understanding best practices and operations, and providing collaborative leadership to push forward existing and past efforts. So here you see us mapping out the actual steps involved in securing a contract, and we learned there's as many as 7 city entities involved in making that happen. And we did this by partnering with the department contract coordinators and the mayor's performance management unit. We also broke down the tasks involved with securing a contract, and really what's highlighted here on the second far left column, you see a lot of X's. That means that the awarding department, as highlighted before, they're really driving the buzz and having to navigate a lot of just the individual tasks and steps involved. To quantify the actual performance metrics, we've leveraged the city's open data platform, largely data pulled from the controller. We've looked at various contracts and the data involved with those, worked with analytics firms, all with the goal of identifying processes that can be optimized and tools and practices that can ease procurement for the city and the vendors. To understand existing best practices, you mentioned peer municipalities. We've spoken with Chicago, Pittsburgh, Boston, to name a few, to understand what's happening out there and what can we adopt and bring into the fold. We've also spoken with industry experts like Accenture, Code for America, and City Mart. They're helping drive a national, if not international, conversation around procurement. Some of these conversations have turned into multidisciplinary established partnerships. One example, we're working with Columbia School of International and Public Affairs to see how they can help us open up the procurement process for emerging businesses. Again, going back to collaboration at the core of our work, we're engaging city leadership across various departments, and we're also looking at past reports, motions, recommendations, and efforts that we can help shepherd and bring into our work. We've spoke about user experience earlier on. We really want to improve the user experience for current and prospective vendors. One way we're doing that is being involved in the BAVIN working group that has been spoken about earlier. It's been largely guided by leadership from ConAd and the Board of Public Works. And here's one example of a pilot project that we're helping shepherd forward. This is the Mayor's Cup. We'll be kind of crowdsourcing innovative solutions to some of the business problems that the city faces right now. We've done a lot of work, and so we've learned a good bit. Some high-level stuff, it's already been discussed, but there's really no centralized shared database for current or pending contracts. So as we know, the departments have to navigate this process largely by themselves. And then, how do you know what's happening and what can you kind of jump on? There's efforts already happening to digitize a lot of the compliance forms, but we learned there's anywhere from 11 to 20 different non-interactive compliance forms that oftentimes have to be printed and be hand-filled out and turned in.
Yeah, and why this committee is a great partner is the LA region is booming as far as entrepreneurship. We have a well-documented, vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem that includes small businesses, immigrant population, and yet we're not necessarily leveraging that to the extent that we can. And so we actually understand procurement is one of those key markers and one of those levers that we as a city can pull. One of Accenture's efforts, they created, in collaboration with a number of entities, a framework that helps cities understand how are you leveraging all your policy levers to really improve your local economic environment. And so on the left, you'll see LA among the top 40 cities that they rated, we're considered second tier as a customer. Where we really fall behind is city as a strategist. They rank us fourth tier, meaning we haven't really articulated a clear mission around what we want our policy levers to create as far as our economic strategy. And it gives us an opportunity to really leverage procurement among other tools that we have at our disposal to really build on that.
So I'll discuss our priority initiatives. And actually, did you want to speak to that slide? Okay. We actually grouped them into 3 areas. And as you can see just by this slide, they have to work together in order to be successful. So highlighting the first one, actually, it will be to develop vendor intelligence and procurement performance. So we look at that as more data analytics, re-examining our payment options, as well as our thresholds, making sure they're in line with state and federal levels. As spoken of earlier, a contract management system that really fills that void that we currently have, as well as giving timeline metrics to certain steps in the process, again, both for vendor expectation as well as us, the city staff. The second one is improving procurement programs and vendor experience. Again, leveraging the scale, defining supplier and diversity success. Again, as we spoke of earlier, addressing the user experience, working with the related departments to do that, and removing the barriers. The third one is to establish procurement leadership in the city. We know that with any change in terms of documents or changing ordinances, that we'll need to address or have risk mitigation, as well as procurement leadership and someone to oversee the entire direction across all departments. So really, our next steps are to collaborate with, again, the council, the electeds, departments. We know that there's a lot of moving trains in terms of procurement. We have a lot of excited departments that are eager to share their ideas and expertise with us, so we're going to be sure to continue to tap into those. We know there are a lot of great efforts underway from BAVIN to the financial management system. We're also going to map out success and determine the best path for implementation, and then look to assigning that long-term placement of the roles and responsibilities. And that concludes our presentation.
Terrific presentation. Members?
No, good.
Well, thank you for that, and it looks like you have a great roadmap laid out. I'd like to advance this motion forward without objection, members, unless there's, and I think when the reports do come back, members have discussed a few additional things that we would like to be considered in that. But I think that the main point of this is how you just concluded, which is there are a lot of really good reforms already underway. What we need to do is herd them now. We need to bring them all together into some sort of focused oversight umbrella. And so in that regard, what I would like to be included in this report when it comes back is a very specific list of actionable recommendations that the council can take to advance this forward to, measurable progress. I don't want to just have another status report that says we're doing a lot of great things, and I want a specific list of this. These are the specific steps that the council should be taking, whether it's resources in the budget, whether it's policy recommendations, but let's be a real partner in this effort and have the council move forward on the actions that we need to take to ensure that this good progress is moving forward in a consolidated, smart, measurable way. So if there's anything else, members?
Just one,
Yeah,
one last
okay.
question, and I concur, and look forward to the follow-up. But you mentioned at the top about the procurement of services in the city. What was that dollar figure for services as opposed to commodities and other stuff?
Sure. Let me just dig that out real quick. I want to make sure I give you the correct number.
And while you're digging that out, if I can just broaden the question a little bit, because I have to tell you, I've struggled to try to define the degree of procurement that this city has since I've been a council member. When we passed the local preference ordinance, the numbers that applied to were all over the map, from 800 million to 2 billion. And I that's too wide of a margin of error. So as we do report this back, and if you have that number that Mr. Price asked for, that's great. But as we do report this back, if we can put some further definition on these subcategories of procurement so that we just have a sense of scale, and also can...
And also something I find interesting is if we could break out the local businesses that are getting these contracts, as opposed to businesses out of state or, sometimes out of the country.
To answer specifically your question, and then I'd like to just add one thing after that, the number that we have from the controller data, open data portal, is 2.6 billion for the budgetary departments. But again, a lot of it is left up to the individual departments, so the accounting practices of how that is logged, there is some gray area that we need to work with and tackle. But it's a big number.
Big number.
And does it can the issue that Mr. Price just raised be readily determined? The location of the contracting parties, for example. At the time we did local preference, the number was that something like 85% of city procurement was to vendors outside of the county of Los Angeles. But I don't know if we can accurately quantify that, given what you just said about variations among departments.
Yeah, and some of those numbers we've seen are pretty consistent with that. On the commodity side, we do pretty well. On the services side, that's where the process has to be improved, or else we're never going to be able to get our local businesses to really feel comfortable being one of our clients. And that's important for us, which is why we're sponsored by the LA Coalition to help drive this.
Yeah, I guess my question was just, can we define that data?
Yes.
Can we identify the whereabouts of the contracting parties in a cumulative way so that we can make the determination of whether we're making progress over time, for example, and bringing more of that work back home?
Yes, we do have at least the open data has the address information, so we can be able to tell you that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For at least for the 2.6 billion that you got off the open data portal, that all of that should be trackable, right?
Yeah, and what appears there is the zip code, so we could do a matching based on LA City zip codes. That's
okay.
That's a fun exercise.
Great. All right. Anything else? All right. Then, without objection, we'll go ahead and approve the motion, advance that to council, and hopefully we'll be able to get more complete reports by the April meeting. That's a few months. You're already well on your way, so I think we're in good shape. All right. If there's nothing further, members, that's our last item of business, and we are adjourned.
Good.